All right. Welcome to the Multnomah Group Annual Retirement Plan Fee Benchmarking webinar. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. This presentation is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording and the materials after this presentation. We do have a Q&A enabled feature. So if you could place any questions in that, we will attempt to answer them during the presentation as they come through, or we'll definitely capture everything at the end if we have missed anything. A little bit about Multnomah Group. We are an independent retirement plan consulting group. That is the core of our business. We serve 181 clients, sponsoring just under 300 plans. Today, we have more than $43 billion under assets of advisement, and we are excited to be in our 24th first year of business. We have consultants across several states while we're located primarily in Portland, and our clients are across the country in 17 states. A little bit about myself. Today, I'm Emily Zinn. I'm the Director of Vendor Services. I lead our Vendor Service Committee, which is responsible for the record keeping due diligence for our clients. So we handle meetings with record keepers to understand services and capabilities. We facilitate requests for proposals for record keeping searches, and we do the annual fee benchmarking, which is what we're here to talk about today. So a couple of topics that we're going to hit on is the importance of fee benchmarking, understanding revenue sources for record keepers that may fall outside of that explicit record keeping fee. We're going to talk a little bit about what we learned from our 2024 data collection. And we're going to talk more about, if plan expenses appear to be high for your record keeper, what are your options in how to handle that, as well as the potential or including the potential of benefits of a full vendor search. So for Multnomah Group clients, we do an annual fee benchmarking survey. For those clients attending today, you may have already had your consultant share this information with you in your last quarterly meeting or maybe in this upcoming quarterly meeting. So why is it that we spend the time and effort every year to do this annual fee benchmarking? Ultimately, monitoring fees is one of the most important responsibilities that a fiduciary has. ERISA, the Employment Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, is the body of law that governs benefit plans, including retirement plans. Under ERISA, there is what requires a plan fiduciary to ensure that fees paid out of the plan are reasonable in light of the services being rendered. ERISA is a process law, so the main focus is that you've gone through a prudent process to review the fees and services and determine that they are reasonable compared to other providers. Fee reasonableness is also a large focus of the Department of Labor. And you're probably familiar that there have been more and more prevalence of excessive fee litigation. And excessive fee litigation focuses not only on the cost of investments within the plan options, but also on the record keeping fees. If you're not subject to ERISA, or the fees are maybe paid directly by the plan sponsor, fee monitoring could be less prescriptive, but maybe no less important. We want to make sure that you're continuing to monitor the reasonableness of fees for the organization, your fiduciary responsibility to the organization, as well as to your participants. We have a handful of clients that are subject to state laws as opposed to ERISA. Those state laws also tend to have very similar guidelines for a duty of prudence to monitor fees. and in some cases point directly back to the language that is in ERISA. So ultimately, we take the best practice approach that these plans work that as plans work toward the ERISA standard for monitoring fees. There's a couple of different methods that you can take for monitoring fees. Um, Fee benchmarking is the easiest and least precise. So this is really focused on using industry data to establish broad ranges for plans of a similar size. This doesn't capture the complexities of a specific plan, such as on-site education or additional compliance testing that may be required by the plan. So this gives a broad range of where you could expect bids to be if you were to go out to solicit proposals. Um, a maybe slightly more precise is a request for bid. So a few additional details are shared with a record keeper, plan information, investment lineup, maybe asset levels, number of participants. So it gives those specific plan details to a provider to help them give you a better, maybe closer bid for services. But ultimately, the most comprehensive option is the request for proposal. This is a more difficult from a time perspective piece, but it's tailored to the circumstances of the plan, the objectives, and the service needs. This is about going out to market for a competitive bid because of the time required, and we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end. This best practice is to do this on a periodic basis rather than an annual basis. So really what we're looking at within our fee benchmarking study report is that we're looking to capture that general information to help evaluate kind of where your plan sits and opportunities for soliciting a request for bid or a request for proposal to get a closer, more detailed analysis should that be necessary. So talking a little bit about our fee benchmarking report and how we view it, we're really looking at the fee benchmarking report to provide a holistic picture on the plan expenses to the best extent that we can. First and foremost, we are focused on the cost of the core record keeping services. So this is the explicit fee that a record keeper is charging on a per head maybe basis or an asset basis for those services. We focus on how those fees are allocated amongst the plan. So how are they actually assessed and structured within your plan? We think that this is an important aspect and like to bring this forefront to our committees and keep it in front of our consultants as an opportunity to discuss what is appropriate for how plan services costs are charged to your participants. And we want to make sure that there's fairness across participants, some reasonable fairness. Other sources, we want to identify other sources of potential revenue for the record keeper as well. This could include some indirect income, things that are a little bit less transparent. So our benchmarking report looks to kind of bring some color to those areas to the extent that we are able to gather data from the record keepers themselves. And then additionally, we're looking to summarize the investment management fees. So as a Multnomah Group client, your consultant will be reviewing and monitoring the expense ratio of investments on a regular basis, to ensure that you are in the lowest cost share class available to you. But within this report, we are looking to provide a point-in-time snapshot of those fees collected on investments and how those funds are charging it, whether it's a revenue share component associated with the investment management fees, whether those are retained by the record keeper or returned to the plan and the participants. So we're trying to give you that holistic picture of what are the explicit record keeping and administrative costs, how are those being paid, what other revenue sources might there be out there that you don't see as transparently, and then a summary of those investment fees as well. So going back to that explicit record keeping, core record keeping fee. So we are looking to, once we've captured all the data about the plan, details and expenses, the value we really find is in establishing a peer range to see where your plan falls on those, specifically those explicit costs. We use proprietary market pricing data that includes existing pricing, vendors' responses to recent comparable searches, and as well as our discussion with vendors regarding their current pricing structures. This is our estimate of the pricing a client would receive if they were to conduct a competitive vendor search in the marketplace today. So I think that's really important, is that we're trying to be in time with what's going on today. We're not looking too far in the rearview mirror, and we're definitely not trying to project what record keeping fees could be in the future. So we use two key components to establish this peer group range. First and foremost is the number of participants with an account balance. This is a good proxy for record keepers to understand the utilization your plan may have. So what do I mean by utilization? The number of participants really drives how many calls there are into a call center, how many transactions there are to be processed, such as loans and distributions. So this is a number that record keepers regularly look at to establish pricing when we do go out for competitive bid, um, to understand how what the utilization of your plan is going to look like. And the second component is average account balance. So average account balance is a good proxy for the size of the plan. If you have a $50 million plan with 500 participants or a $50 million plan with 30 participants, there will be a very different margin for the record keeper and how they view and handle your plan. And so those are the two key components that we're looking at to establish these peer benchmarking ranges. We see that this is what record keepers focus on when they're pricing plans in a competitive situation. We get a lot of questions around these two areas. And then it's also become, an industry reasonableness measure. The peer range, what we're not trying to do is determine a specific average fee to expect for a plan of your size. Because we aren't taking into consideration the plan design features or the quality of service that you may be receiving. We're not looking to create that specific average, but rather give a range for what would be appropriate of a plan of your size. As you can see on the right-hand side, gives an example where we sort of pinpoint within the range where that specific plan would fall. This again is on the explicit costs that we know. But as you've listened to other conversations that we've had here at the Multnomah Group, there are other ways that record keepers can generate profits. Talk a little bit about this area, but if you're interested in learning more, we do have a separate webinar and white paper about the retailification of retirement plans. So that's something we're happy to share with you if you're interested in learning more. But to talk about this a little bit here in context of the fee benchmarking report that we generate, we're trying to capture that holistic view of the plan expenses. Um, what we've seen in practice with record keepers, as well as conversation with record keepers, there are other levers that the vendors can use to earn revenues from the plan assets themselves or from the participants on top of that explicit record keeping fee. Um, the revenue associated with these may be less transparent. So that's really within our fee benchmarking report. We're attempting to quantify, to the extent possible, either the assets or the number of participants that may be affected by some of these opportunities that the record keeper has. So talk a little bit about the 5 most common areas that we see. Proprietary investment management. So that means the plan could elect to use, say, brand name, target date series to be offered by brand name record keeper. This there creates the proprietary investment management in that the product of the record key, it's a product of the record keeper, and there are revenues from that ultimately flowing back to the record keeping organization. This is a focus of the DOL in those excessive fee cases because it can give the appearance that the proprietary investment was offered maybe purely because the record keeper requested it. I think that's important for us to ensure that investment decisions are made kind of in the same light as any investment decision, whether regardless of whether it's offered proprietarily from the record keeper or it's offered by another party. The clients work that with the Molten Goma Group may very well have proprietary products in your investment lineup. What's important is that we do the same regular due diligence and monitoring as other investments. So there's no difference in the way that we are reviewing, monitoring investments, making recommendations for the inclusion in the plan lineup than any other investment. The plan sponsor really does have a fiduciary duty to monitor and ensure that it's a prudent option, regardless of whether it's offered by the record keeper or not. So managed accounts, and managed accounts, if you're not familiar with them, are essentially a robo-advisor that participants can opt into with the record keeper. This is an additional fee for service that those participants would pay directly. So there's no additional cost to the plan itself. But those who opt in to get those additional services around support for their investment allocation would pay a specific fee. This could be a valuable service for participants with outside assets or somebody who wanting to include assets of their spouse in their bigger full picture financial analysis. The record keeper works with an independent fiduciary duty or fiduciary that kind of helps to determine those asset allocations, which the independent fiduciary retains income and a portion goes back to the record keeper. So one of the things that's really important with the proprietary investment management and managed accounts, first and foremost, is that these are the committee has discretion over the ability to offer these services or the service or these products. And it's important to make sure that these decisions are being made separately so that the plan sponsor is comfortable with those products or services separate from the record keeper and the record keeping fee itself. What we want to make sure is that the record keeping fee by itself is a reasonable fee. Many of the providers offer significant discounts for the inclusion of certain proprietary investment management or the offering of managed accounts. So we want to make sure that that record keeping fee is reasonable before these services and products are added in. We don't want to have the appearance and or actuality that these are being used to lower your record keeping fees to become reasonable. So we really want to make sure these are separate and distinct decisions um, between record keeping and services provided. IRA rollovers and cross-selling products, most of these are most of the record keepers are large financial institutions, and they have their own retail offerings. So in addition to IRAs, they might have services such as a 529 account, an HSA account, banking options, insurance products, and in and of itself, none of these products or services are bad. But what's really important here is how record keepers are having the conversation with your participants and whether they're using the relationship that they have with the plan and that participant to incentivize them to take action in one of these areas. So from a distribution advice perspective, is the record keeper looking at the participant's best interest if they're recommending an IRA rollover? We want to make sure we're not moving participants into a retail IRA that could have potentially higher fees if it's not in the best of the client's interest. Similarly, on a cross-selling perspective, we want to make sure from a marketing perspective that we understand how data is being shared across portions of the business. So are they giving plan data, participant information to another area of the business in order to try to sell them additional products? IRA rollovers is something that's pretty transparent among providers. They are willing to disclose how many participants roll money into proprietary IRAs. That's an area that we can kind of capture. We aren't able to tie maybe explicit fees to, but we can see the activity that's going on there. Cross-selling by and far is the hardest to capture data that gives us the information about what may be happening on the plan level. And then annuitization. In and out of plan annuities are becoming more of a common topic with the increasing development of lifetime income products. So far, these have had pretty low adoption, but there's more and more products coming to market every day. And I think that it's going to be important to understand how participant data is going to be used to market or incentivize participants to move to an annuity situation and upon kind of termination and distribution. Annuities tend to have a high profit margin for these products. And so particularly those products that are proprietary, it's going to be important to monitor going forward as this becomes more prevalent in the marketplace. Ultimately, I think it's important for committees to know that these exist, that you have some discretion over certain areas, but it's about monitoring the impact they could have on your participant outcomes. So turning back to the 2024 fee analysis and what this really told us about what's going on in the marketplace. We collected data for benchmarking on 220 plans. So we have a wide range of small to large plans. It's a good database in conjunction with prior years. Over the last few years, we've talked a lot about fee compression in the industry. This year, we saw peer ranges remain stable from the prior year. I think we really didn't modify our peer ranges as much as we have in other years. We do look at the peer ranges every year with maybe a little bit of a heavier weight towards what we're seeing out of current vendor searches and what they're telling us. We've seen competitive searches become more consistent in pricing. So prior years, we saw kind of a lot of disparity on occasion within competitive pricing, particularly in the 403B space across the vendors. This year, we were seeing much closer bids across vendors. So there kind of has been a settling out, maybe, of some of this pricing compression that we've seen. So we didn't really modify our peer ranges this year. Um, Fee negotiations without a search have been tight. So one of the options we can talk about, we talk about if fees are too high, is to go back and do fee negotiations directly with the record keeper before going out for search. These have mostly just brought our over kind of potentially high clients into the peer range. We don't share those peer ranges with vendors, so they don't know what they're targeting for. But we have seen them just come slightly within. I think there was a lot more fee negotiation and less going out for competitive bid during and just after the pandemic. So fee negotiations for a period of time were we're dropping kind of sizable. But now, as things have more returned to normal, we're seeing that the competitive bids are bringing fees down lower than just the negotiations. So I would say that if you haven't renegotiated in a while, I would encourage you, that a search may be an opportunity to capture a bigger part of that downside. The discount for plans with certain proprietary management is meaningful. I think what we're continuing to see is that some providers place a high weight on proprietary fixed general account products, and they're offering significant discounts to that explicit record keeping fee. So again, that's something that we are aware of, and we want to kind of continue to always put up front to make sure that those investment management decisions aren't being, or investment decisions aren't being driven to make a record keeper decision. So just, that continues to be the case, that there are large discounts there. Provider consolidation at the plan level continues to present significant economic benefits. What do I mean by this? Is that we have recently had a few plan sponsors who previously were in a multiple vendor solution. So multiple vendors providing record keeping services to their retirement plan. We've helped them to consolidate at that plan level down to one provider. And this economic benefits to the plan and the participants has been quite significant in reducing their fees. So this continues to be a good opportunity for plans with multiple providers looking to maybe not only simplify, but also reduce their fees. And then lastly, new this year that we included in our fee benchmarking report was float income. And this is something that can be a noteworthy component of revenue for some of our providers. So this is something new we looked at this year and added to our reports. So many of you may or may not be familiar with float income. To give a little bit of background on what we're talking about here. This is really about the plan assets being in transit and interest that's earned as a result of that. So what do I mean by that? Let's say I've just retired and I take a distribution to fund my monthly expenses. When I take that distribution, maybe I go online, I request a distribution, a portion of my investments are liquidated. And then they're deposited into what's called an omnibus bank account of the record keeper. Then the record keeper goes through their processing to send me a check. That takes a handful of days to arrive. I don't go to the bank right away. Finally gets deposited in my bank and clears my bank account. When all is said and done, maybe it's been 10 days, that money has been sitting in a bank account, earning interest because it can be invested in short-term investments. So that float income, that interest earned on the kind of in-transit money, is not something new. So this has been around. This has been part of kind of the process of record keepers for maybe forever. But this isn't something new. But why are we talking about it today when we haven't been talking about it in the past? There's a couple of two factors I think that are really driving this. So one is that kind of 2014 to 2016, there was a lawsuit that was brought against one of the specific record keeping providers that alleged that float income was a plan asset. So the allegation was that this was money of the plan, not money of the record keeper. It was not ultimately successful, but it did begin to shape how record keepers are viewing that interest earned. That's one factor. The second factor is that over the last decade, we've had almost 5 years of effectively zero interest rates. We didn't see a real rise until the very end of 2022. So 2023 and 2024 is when we started to see that material increase in short-term interest rates hitting that 4%. And as a result, because of the interest rates and the money sitting in those accounts, it was actually earning something. So these are kind of the two factors that came together. There's been more conversation about that as a revenue source for record keeper, a potential revenue source for record keepers, because it's become a more meaningful dollar amount. So this year we wanted to get a little more information about really what did that look like for all of our clients. We asked record keepers to disclose information about their policies around float, as well as the specifics of each of our clients' plans, how much float income was earned as a result of their plan activity. What we found is that on average, across plans of all sizes, there was kind of on average $8 to $10 per participant earned in float in the 2024 calendar year. So what does that mean? That a plan with 1,000 participants, that could be $8,000 to $10,000 in interest earned that year. That's pretty meaningful. So the second component was, well, there's $8,000 to $10,000. What's your policy for that? We talked that record keepers policies varied quite significantly. If in some cases it's returned to the plan, and then the funds can be used to offset other plan expenses. So we think that's a really great policy. We want to see the money going back and treated almost as if it is a plan asset for you to use on other expenses. In some cases, and in many cases, if it's retained by the record keeper itself. Where it's important here is that float income could be considered a form of indirect compensation to the record keeper, and therefore it needs to be monitored just like those other revenue sources. So if the record keeper is not returning it to the plan, that's almost an added cost that they are or added fee they're collecting on top of that explicit record keeping fee. What's important to know is that this is a conversation that's really become prevalent amongst the record keepers and their policies. Since we started this conversation at the beginning of the year, there are 2 record keepers who have meaningfully changed their policies to begin to credit plans back with float. So we think this is going to be something that's going to become hopefully standard. But right now it's something that we need to be aware of. So there's what can be done in this area, particularly if this is something that you haven't explored with your record keeper in the past. First and foremost, we'd say seek transparency. Understand what's being how much is being earned by your plan in interest, as well as how it's being handled. Make the request that the plan be credited for that float. Larger plans do have leverage here to make that request. And then I think The third thing that what can you do on a plan sponsor side is to really evaluate um, your processes to minimize that in transit time. So something like encouraging the use of ACH, direct deposit rather than checks would be a good option, as well as looking at your contribution to the plan activity. So one of the things I think that we don't necessarily think about is if you make a maybe a sizable non-elective contribution once a year, you send that contribution to the record keeper maybe a day before or a day or two before it actually is allocated to participant accounts. That's a large chunk of money sitting in an interest bearing account that could be generating float. So, looking at some of those processes to make sure that you're optimizing the plan to eliminate possibilities there, in particular, if the record keeper has a policy of not returning float. So minimizing the extra revenue that the record keeper has at their disposal. I think float income is something that we're going to continue to monitor. Obviously, we've talked about that there's policies are being changed to the benefit of plan sponsors, and we want to see more of that. So we're going to continue to monitor and push that for our clients. All right. So what if the plan's expenses are above the peer group ranges? So turning back to the fee benchmarking report and those explicit costs, what is a fiduciary committee to do if it appears that the fees are higher than a peer range? And there's three options here. Um, First and foremost is you can do nothing. You are not required to purchase services from the lowest cost provider under ERISA. If you have separate policies within your organization that does require that, then we can dismiss that. But you're not required to purchase services from the lowest cost provider, but you must be able to demonstrate through a deliberative process that the fees are reasonable. Um, so we would say, if it's above, understand why it's above. If perhaps it's because you have a high number of education days or significantly more complex compliance testing requirements. If those are, gets back to that fees for service portion. So if you can and document the rationale for those fees, you have been, you are meeting your fiduciary duty in that way. We would encourage you to include that information in your fiduciary committee meeting minutes and any other fiduciary committee documentation that you may have. So one option, if you look high, is to do nothing at all. Another option we talked about was negotiating with the service provider, and that could be negotiating for lower fees, or it could be negotiating for higher levels of services. It's that balancing act between reasonableness for fees and services. And then the third option would be soliciting proposals from qualified vendors. So this would be that competitive search. Best practice is, in our opinion, is every 5 to 7 years to put it out for a competitive bid, or as something material has changed with the plan itself. Maybe there was a merger, an acquisition, or maybe there was a divestiture. So you've gained a lot of participants, lost a lot of participants. Something meaningful has changed within the plan. We would suggest going out to competitive bid. To talk a little bit more about the benefits of a vendor search. Within the excessive fee cases, we have seen both monetary and non-monetary settlements as a result. Of those non-monetary settlements, one of the largest components is plan sponsors meeting best practices, which has included in many cases the kind of requirement to conduct an RFP. So effectively, within these non-monetary settlements, they're saying that regular benchmarking is not sufficient. It does not ensure that fees are competitive. I think we use that fee benchmarking as kind of our first case, and then a good monitoring tool. But ultimately, to do your due diligence and ensure competitiveness, a request for proposal is competitive market is necessary to meet that duty. I think second, going out for a competitive search allows you to evaluate the plan's pricing structure. So I think this particularly plays into 403Bs more than maybe some 457s, more than maybe the 401k space. But a lot of the older contracts with 403Bs have significant embedded costs to the investments that are returned back to the record keeper. And what this does is it creates a wildly different per participant cost because it's dependent on their investments. So I may be paying a lot more than somebody else in the plan just because of the investments that I've selected. One of the things, kind of back to that, kind of meeting our fiduciary duty, is to evaluate that reasonable fairness. There's a couple different methods for looking at how participants are charged and ensuring that there is a reasonableness across participants. And then another area is fiduciary liability insurance. This is an area that has seen costs rise year over year, and particularly as these litigation cases have become more prevalent. And so with this increase of liability insurance costs, one of the things that we're seeing more and more questions around is the last time that you've conducted a record keeper search for your plans. There was a report that came out earlier this year that Aon surveyed providers, and nearly all of them indicated that plan sponsors who have acknowledged, going into a search or doing a search has weighed into the cost, the renewal pricing cost. I don't think that it's going to bring your price down if you go to do a search, but certainly it may slow it down from the increases, right? So it may stop it from going as high. Secondarily, vendor searches really give you the opportunity to evaluate the marketplace. As the record keeper environment, there's been a lot of consolidation among providers over the last decade. And in these consolidation efforts and more competitive marketplace, the record keepers have really looked to gain operational efficiencies with the tools and technology and capabilities that they may have. So this may be an opportunity for you to see what else is out there in the marketplace, but it might also be an opportunity for you to evaluate services or features that you're missing out on with your vendor today. And then it's an opportunity to solicit improved services. The quality and the breadth of administrative services that record keepers are willing to kind of have outsourced to them has really expanded, as well as the participant service offerings for education and the like. So, this is really an opportunity for you to check out the marketplace overall and see if there's something else that may be a better fit for your plan into the future. And why we talk about this as a exercise that we don't want to do all the time is that it really is a commitment to a 6 to 9 month evaluation and implementation process. Here at the Multnomah Group, we want to take off as much of that responsibility and load from you. So we're trying to make it an easy workload for you all. And happy to help with those processes. So we do vendor searches for our existing clients. We often do this as part of our new client onboarding, particularly if they've been with a vendor for a long time and haven't done the search. And then we can also do this as a standalone ad hoc service for for plans that are not current Multnomah Group clients. We think that there's a lot of value, and we, you know, have already done kind of in flight or have completed this year, already done 17 vendor searches. We think this is a really important aspect for plans and for our clients, and that's really why we have a dedicated vendor service team and committee focused on these activities. That's really all the prepared marks that I have for you. We will be sending out a couple of resources. This is part of our fiduciary training program we do with all of our clients throughout the year, is fiduciary training to make sure that they are staying apprised of important topics in the market. And so we will be sending out the record keeping fee benchmarking process, as well as the newest one about float earnings that came out this year. So we'll be sharing those with the materials. And of course, if there's any other materials that you're interested in learning about, or have heard us talk about, please do reach out. We're happy to um, provide those to you. Lastly, I'll go ahead and leave up the disclaimers for a moment for our compliance team. But I think what is important for us to share here as well is that we are interested in continuing to explore the fee benchmarking data and information. And so we will certainly offer to participants of the webinar, or clients that are out there that are not current Multnomah Group clients, that we will do a fee benchmarking complimentary. It takes very little information from you. We're happy to give that information, share, based on our proprietary data, what we think the peer benchmarks are. We're happy to share that information and where we see your plan fitting within that. Welcome to reach out with any other further questions. And there's nothing else. I think we can sign off for today.